Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. My name is Shivam and I'm the Solution Specialist at TimeXtender. In today's episode of TimeXtender Tuesdays, we're going to learn how you can leverage Theobald Xtract Universal to extract your SAP data and bring it into an ODX instance using a REST data source. Let's get to it. Today, we're going to take a sneak peek into the lives of everyone at Dunder Mifflin Paper Company, a company that everybody adores and remembers, especially me. It's from my favorite hit TV show, the US version. And if you know the show that I'm talking about, comment down below. Michael Scott, who is the CEO, has tasked his data team to create KPIs and dashboard from their financial data, which is in their SAP system. So Dwight gets this task. He consults with Jim, who's the data engineer, on how he's going to bring in the SAP data into a data warehouse for Dwight to use and create those dashboards. Jim consults with Kevin, who is an SAP wizard, and works with him to identify which all are the tables that are required. So in this case, it's BKPF and BSEG. Once Jim has identified the tables that is required for this data warehouse for Dwight to use, he is thinking of the best way to pull in SAP data into TimeXtender. Jim is a TimeXtender evangelist, so he is looking at multiple ways which could be more efficient for them and have great performance for them to bring in this data quickly and complete this requirement. So Jim comes up with a solution that he will use Theobald Xtract Universal to extract data from their complex SAP system and bring it into TimeXtender, and he drew up a whole diagram and an architecture on how he's going to accomplish it. So now let's jump into the diagram and see what he came up with. This is the diagram that Jim has come up with to explain the architecture behind the solution. He is going to define all the connection parameters in Xtract Universal so that he can establish the connection with SAP so that he's able to extract data from there. And then he can define all the tables that are required, which in our case is BKPF and BSEG. And once that is done, he can set the endpoint in Xtract Universal as HTTP JSON. Once the data is extracted, we can use that and put it into an RSD generator. So what that is going to do is it's going to create those RSD files, which we can then use and configure it as a REST data source in our ODX. And that way we can bring in SAP data from your source system into TimeXtender. Before we look into the implementation steps that Jim is taking, there are two prerequisites. The first one is to have Python version 3.8 or later. The second is having a Theobald Xtract Universal trial license or a full-on enterprise license. Now let's get into the implementation steps that Jim has taken to accomplish this. So these are the steps that Jim has taken to accomplish this. And the first step is to install and configure Xtract Universal. If you don't have a license for it, you can always go for a trial license to check it out. The next step is to configure your SAP connections and then define your table or your BAPI or your RFC information to create those extractions in your Xtract Universal. And don't forget to define your endpoints as HTTP JSON. Once that is done and your extract is ready, then you can download and unzip the Xtract Universal RSD-generator utility tool. The link for it will be in our implementation guide, which will be in the description below. Once that is done, all you have to do is edit the environment file, run the batch file, and it is done. So it will create the RSD file based on the extractions. Once that is done, now we can log in to our web portal, wherein we will define a REST data source and point it to where those RSD files are located. Once that is done, we will map it to our ODX instance and then go to our desktop application, hit refresh, and see and map that data source. Once that is done, we will synchronize, do a transfer task, and verify that the tables are added. And then we can check and set primary keys. So these are the steps that Jim has taken to create an SAP data in the modern data warehouse and for Dwight to use. Now we're going to jump in and go through each step live right here with you to go from the first step to the end step and how Jim accomplished this. So now let's jump right into it and see how the magic happens. The first step in Jim's implementation guide is to install and configure Xtract Universal. I have already done that, so I can move on to the next step wherein I define my connection parameters for Xtract Universal to connect to SAP. So now let me show you how I did that. So click on Server, select Manage Sources. Once the pop-up opens, click on the Add button right here. Here in the host, you can give your URL right here, give your authentication if it's there, which I'm sure it is, and give your RFC options right here. Once you have set all these parameters, the best thing to do is test server connections so you don't face any hiccups going forward. I have already set up my EC5 connection right here so that we can move on quickly to the next step. So the next step is to define our tables that we need for our extraction. So let's get to it. So click on this new and here give your name. So I'm going to give BKPF right here. Select the tables right here. So Jim in future, if there's a requirement that comes in, he can select a BAPI, he can select a Delta Q and create those extractions. So now I'm going to click OK. So now in this pop-up is where I'm going to add my tables. So here it's a wild character search right here. So I'm going to do BKPF and hit my search button. So it will pull up all the BKPF related tables right here. I only need the first one, the header table. I'm going to select OK. So it's now connecting to SAP and bringing all the fields. As you can see here, you have your company code, you have your fiscal year, you have your document type, you have all the information right here. And this is all your SAP names. For someone who has not used SAP before, these can be very, very confusing. They have their own language, and the best thing is we get descriptions. So for someone who's new, can understand what Bellner means, which for me it is a counting number. I'm very used to it. So now another thing that you can do is load live preview. So you can load the live data that is coming in from this table right here so that you know that you're getting some data. And you can scroll and see all the data is available. So now all you need to do is click OK. Another important thing to note, as you can see here, the destination, it says HTTP CSV. But as we read through in Jim's diagram, his architecture diagram, that it is supposed to be HTTP JSON. So you're going to right click right here and click destination settings. Here under destination, we're going to select HTTP JSON and hit OK. So now it's all set. Now we're going to do the same thing for BSEG. Come in, enter your name for your extraction, click OK. Now we're going to select our tables, which is in this case BSEG, and let's hit that search button. I'm going to select right here, and we can see all the information is readily available. And click OK. again, the destination is CSV. We need to make sure that the destination is HTTP JSON. Once the extractions are set, now come here on your run and hit run so that it can create those extractions for you.
A few moments later.
Once the extractions have run successfully, you can close it and we can move on to our next step, which is downloading and unzipping our xu-rsd-generator utility tool. So let's get to it. The next step in Jim's implementation guide is to download and unzip the xu-rsd-generator utility tool. So this is how your folder structure is going to look like. And now what we have to do is run this install batch file. Now the question comes in, what will this batch file do? So here, running this install batch file, it will run those Python libraries so that the RSD generator can work, along with setting up all your Python dependencies so that it can create and generate those RSD files for you. So if you want to do it manually, you can go through the README document and follow the steps along. I have already run this install batch file, so now we can move on to our next step, which is to set up environment properties. So now let's go ahead and change our environment properties. So you can find it in your xu-rsd-gen folder. So right click, here is your environment file. Right click, open with a notepad. So now I'm going to just bring it over right here. Alright, so here is our environment property file. So here is what we are going to make some changes. Now, the first thing that we need to change is our XU base URL. So this is the URL that you need to point to wherein your Xtract Universal is located. So it's the URL followed by the port. If your URL or for your XU is on the same machine as your TimeXtender server application, then you can use localhost and your default port is 8065. Now the next thing that we need to change is your RSD target folder. So here I have defined my folder as in my C drive under the folder sources and SAP XU. So now how is it important is that this is the folder that your RSD files are going to be generated in. And the rest of it we don't need to change, and we can save and close this. And we will go on to our next step. So this is the folder that I've created where my RSD files are going to be generated. So right now it's empty. So hopefully when we follow our next step, which is our last step in this process, which is running the batch file, it will have some RSD files for our BKPF and BSEG. Now the last step is to run our batch file. So for that, I'm going to open my command prompt and run the batch file. So now I'm going to put in my file path right here. I've copied my file path, so it's right here. And now I am going to run my batch file right here. So once the batch file is run, the RSD files will get created in the target folder that you have specified in your environment properties. So let's check that out. All right, so let's go click on my PCs, and this is the folder that I've created in my C drive, sources, under SAP XU, and these are our BKPF and BSEG RSD files. So quick thing, let's copy our file path so that we can configure it in our web portal. So we're coming close to the end of the architecture and the solutioning that Jim has created. Now let's get to our web portal and configure this as a REST data source. The penultimate step is to add our data source and map it to our ODX instance. So how we're going to do it is by logging into our web portal, which can be found at app.timextender.com. And once you successfully log in, this will be your homepage. And now to add your data source, select the data source under the data state drop down. And now we're going to click add data sources. And here is where we will select REST as our data source connector. So type in your REST, select that. And now we're going to give it a name. So I'm going to give it SAP xu-rsd and give a little description, SAP data. And now we're going to put in the file location for our RSD files under location in the schema section. So now let's scroll down to it. So it will be right after your Azure authentication and after JSON and XML. So here you have your schema tab. Here you have your locations. Put down your file path right here. And now all we need to do is just go ahead, scroll down to the bottom and hit the add button right here. So now the data source is added. So the next step is to map this data source into our ODX instance. So again, hit the data state drop down, select instances, click on your ODX instance right here. And now we're going to drop down and hit mapped data source and hit add button to add the newly added data source. Select that and it is successfully added. So now we have completed our penultimate step. Now the last step is to open our TimeXtender Desktop application and refresh our instances, add the data source, run an execution, synchronization, and a transfer task. So let's get to it. Now we have reached our final step, which is to verify the SAP data in TimeXtender. So the first step is we're going to hit the refresh icon right here so that we can bring in the mapped data source and ODX and refresh all our instances. So once it's loaded and refreshed, we're going to add the newly added data source. So right click your data source, select add data source, and here we're going to give it name SAP data and hit next. And we're going to select SAP XU extract and we're going to bring in your data right here. So this is where you can choose all the tables or you can choose let me select tables. So let me go ahead and do let me select tables right here. And it will load both the tables that we have as BKPF and BSEC. So we have it right here. And we can select preview table as well to see if it is bringing in all the data correctly or not. And we can hit execute right here. And it will load all the data that is coming in from our RSD files. Give it a second. It will load your 100 rows right here after doing a select star from BKPF. Now, once the data is there and we've verified it, we'll go ahead and add it. And same thing, we're going to go ahead and add BSEC as well. Hit next. We'll add a transfer task as well. And now we're going to execute our synchronize task and give it a name. I'm going to do a full load. And we're doing all the selected tables in the data source. So now the synchronize has run successfully. Now we can run a full load. So now I've just executed my transfer task. So what it's going to do is it's going to bring in all the data, all our SAP data, and put it in our ODX storage.
A few moments later.
Transfer task is completed. Now the next step is that we can set up primary keys as well, which is important when you're dealing with SAP data and creating a data warehouse. So to set up primary keys, right click your data source, choose set up primary keys. As you can see, there is no primary key. You can select override, and here I'm going to select my account number, which is my Bellner, and my company code. So this is what I'm going to select as my primary keys, and you can do it right here, and you can click OK. So now we have brought in our SAP data into TimeXtender, and we can similarly add it into our data areas as well. So we can click here and add it to our MDW. We can use our table selector right here, select the tables that we need, and add it to our MDW. So this finishes this episode of TimeXtender Tuesdays, and stay tuned for the next episode for riveting content on TimeXtender, and see you next time.